But yeah, I should have thought of that it is fall break. Um, well, tonight we're going to be talking about herbaceous landscape plants. And so this is one that I really like to teach, and it goes over some of the specific species. And um, we also have a lot of reference lists. I don't know if I mentioned that. If you go to uthort.com and you're wanting, like a small flowering tree for your yard, you would put that in the search bar and it'll bring up all the public publications that we would have on small flowering trees. Or if you look uthort, HORT.com. So that's where the majority of our publications are housed. And so if you are looking for something specific, vegetables, or it might be flowers or shrubs, trees, grasses, all that information is on there. So, okay. So tonight, when I talk about herbaceous landscape plants, I always throw in, a little bit about landscape design too. We are going to have a segment on that, but it all goes together, in your site assessment and your selection of plants and things like that. So, tonight, herbaceous plants are basically the opposite of woody plants. Herbaceous plants are going to be things like your perennials and annuals and biennials, and we're going to revisit those definitions. But a lot of your wildflowers or hostas, things like that, that would pretty much die back to the ground when we get our first frost. But as long as the root system lives, they're going to come back. And so we'll go through those. But your herbaceous plants, they usually have one bloom time. Like some will bloom longer, like a black-eyed Susan will bloom pretty much midsummer on up to frost. Whereas you'll have some types of other flowers. What am I gonna think of here? Maybe daylilies, okay, that might bloom early in the spring. And if they're not a reblooming daylily, that's all you get is one show. And so what you want to do when you're thinking about a landscape design is think about those bloom periods of different perennials and have something going on in your garden throughout the whole season. So you can use perennials, or you can use herbaceous plants, you can use woody plants and grasses. All those things add diversity to your landscape and keep you, where you have something to look at, something nice to look at all year round. So you don't just want to have a barren landscape in the winter, or just have all evergreens. You can pick evergreens with berries on them, things like that, different shaped leaves. So basically what we're going to go over tonight is how to grow herbaceous plants. We're going to talk about the basic requirements of growing those herbaceous plants, demonstrate how to design gardens, describe the growing cycles, and we're going to look at some aspects of maybe some specialty or theme gardens that you could incorporate. And I almost forgot. You wanted to talk about something. Don't let me forget. Okay, during break. Okay. Short-term memory. Okay, so herbaceous plants, as I said, they're going to be a soft, fleshy, kind of a succulent type plant. They may be classified as annuals, perennials, or biennials. Your woody perennials are largely trees and shrubs. They may be deciduous, ones that lose their foliage, or evergreen, and they hold on to their foliage and they retain their stems, which resume growth each year. And so we've already learned about our woody plants. So tonight we'll be just concentrating on the herbaceous plants. So annuals and perennials, a lot of people usually get these backwards, and I think it's just a word thing. But annuals are going to complete their life cycle in one season. Okay, they're going to bring out their foliage, they're going to flower, and they're going to fruit all in the same season, and then they will die back. Some of them are going to be warm season, some will be cool season. So our cool season annuals, like pansies, okay, we can put those out at this time of the year, and they will pretty much survive throughout the winter, and then they'll pick up and thrive in the spring. But as soon as it gets hot, they're going to go away. Okay. And they may put down seeds and come back. So, and an example of a warm season annual would be like a petunia. I've had petunias come back. They're considered an annual, but if they put down seeds and they've got a really good place where they're growing, you've got your site prepped good and it's got good soil and those seeds take hold, then they'll come back next year from seed, but they're still an annual plant. Okay. And most of what we consider annuals in different growing zones, the warmer climate zones, those may be perennials. So if we go down to Florida or we go to the Bahamas and things like that, the things that we have for house plants and annual plants can be year round, but they won't live year round here because either the heat or the cold will kill them back. So perennials are those that are going to live for several years. They do die back um, to to the ground in the fall. So at this time of the year, they're going into their dormancy stage, just like our trees are. I figure with the night temperatures staying down below 50s, yeah, we're going to start seeing those leaves change and start to drop here pretty soon. Hopefully, we'll get some good fall color before they all just fall off. So, but they're going to die back to the ground in the fall, and as long as their root system stays alive, they'll come back. Sometimes you have short-lived perennials. Some why is I start to say one and then I forget what it is. But these perennials, as I mentioned, are going to have short bloom periods and they will flower seasonally after establishment. So you want to look at those bloom periods when you're planning out your landscape design and make sure you've got something flowering all through the season. And you can supplement with annuals for the color, for the impact on that. So, yes.
One thing to note is you see flowers that have they're hybrid, they will not breed through.
Yes. This is true. Yeah, this is true. They'll go back to their parentage or to their DNA. You're not actually going to get the same plant. It's just like if you took a apple seed and you started a little apple tree, it's not necessarily going to be the apple seed or the type of apple that you've got growing in your in your yard or wherever you got that apple seed from. So just think Punnett Square back in biology, all those opportunities. We talked about parents with blue eyes and brown eyes, and then how many chances of children that would have blue eyes or brown eyes or green eyes. Red hair just throws red hair, brown hair. Red hair just kind of throws them off. So. But anyway, the life cycle of a biennial. This is a plant that needs 2 growing seasons to survive. Or to complete its life cycle. So when planted from seed, they're going to grow foliage that first year, but they will not flower. Okay, you will not see a flower. So they produce that foliage. Then the second year, they fruit and die. Okay, and they may put down seeds. And so if you have a bed of foxglove or Sweet William, money plant, Dame's rocket, evening primrose, those are just a few that are biennials. They're going to get to where they're throwing down seeds and you're going to have something blooming all the time. But you have to remember they're still biennials and they're going to be in their second year. And so if you go to the store and you buy foxgloves that are in bloom, at what point are they at? In their second year. So if you plant those and maybe they don't put down seeds, you're not going to have. Okay. Or if they do put down seeds, then you're just going to see some foliage come up. Then you've got to wait another year. Then you'll have flowers again. So biennials are a little bit tricky. And a lot of our weeds are biennials too. And that makes them kind of hard to control because they just, the foliage disappears and so nothing to spray and then boom, they're back the next year. So, but that's the difference between annuals, perennials, and biennials. That's our 3 life cycle classifications. Okay. All right. And we have grasses. We'll talk a little bit about grasses and ground covers. We have annual and perennial ornamental grasses. Now, they can be added into your landscape with your trees and your shrubs and other plants, and really need to be used more, I think, in design. So we've got some out in the beds here. Now, when they redid our office, I think they really did a terrible job because where they put the plants and everything was just pure gravel and rock and debris that they put in when they took out the site or the asphalt stuff that was here. They just basically reduced our number of parking spots and added some planting areas, which was good and bad. A lot of times people just drive right through the gravel and the planting areas out here. But anyway, we do have some ornamental grasses out there. They're called heavy metal. And I think those are a really nice plant, and they've grown in that environment. So if you buy them already started, like you can buy them either in 4-inch pots or sometimes in 1-gallon pots and just plant the plant itself. It's easier to get them established that way than to try to do warm season grass seed. Yeah, because you have to do a lot of ground preparation if you want the warm season grass seeds, but that is possible.
Those ones. Yeah.
They're perennial. They're perennial. Now they will go dormant with the first frost, but we leave them up, and because they have a decorative plume, and there's different colored, different varieties that have different colored plumes, and so you leave those up during the winter for interest, and then in the spring you're going to cut them back about March, mid-March, first part of April. Yeah, February, 1st of March. Yeah, before they start growing, usually. And you want to cut them back to about 3 or 4 inches, about 3 or 4 inches. And if you have really large ornamental grasses, Master Gardener told me this trick a long time ago, Mr. Jim Willard. He will take a rope and he puts them around, ties that rope on, and then takes his chainsaw and takes it off right across the top, and then he can just pick up that pile and he puts it in the compost or uses it as mulch in the garden. So yeah, hedge clippers will work. Just depends on how big they are. Now, if you've got the invasive miscanthus, the maiden grass, be ready to have your full armor on, because those things will tear you up. They're very sharp, very sharp leaves. So and they're very hard to divide after they get really big. So I like the switchgrass family. A lot of different varieties, color schemes available. Good. Yeah, the river oats and sea oats are great. You would be planting those right now. And yeah, you can cut them back in the spring. Yeah, cut them back in the spring. But really, the oats and the wheat are going to be an annual. You could let them go to seed and collect the seed and then plant them again the following fall would be. So I misspoke. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes.
I have found that something that is from annual, but it grows more and more at the same time. And you can also use it in color.
Yep.
Planting lemon
Yeah.
will throw out the 3 feet tall and big and wide, and
yeah. The lemongrass is typically an annual in our environment. Okay, yeah, the lemongrass, but you can harvest it and use it to make different types of tinctures. Makes good mosquito spray, different things like that. So you can just Google, what you can do with lemongrass. But it smells really good.
Like lemongrass, it can be
Lemon.
Thai.
Hmm?
I mean, like Thai cuisine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can chop it up and use it as an herb, dry it, use it as an herb with a lemon taste to it, or you can make a tincture. Right.
Want the
Habitat.
take all the way out.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's gonna be hard to dig. So, yeah. I know one of our cut flower producers grows the lemongrass to put in his flower arrangements. It's kind of something a little different. It's that spiky that you want in your arrangements. And then it also has the smell. And then, like I said, you can Google, you can make different tinctures and sprays and things like that. So anyway, the grasses can be used as a component of your foundation plantings or part of a screen planting. When planted in mass, they can serve as ground covers. Like if you have low growing grass type. But the grass selections available have expanded a lot in the last few years as to what we have available. And like I said, usually you can buy the plants themselves, or you could buy the rooted pieces. It's kind of like getting a bare root tree. You would get a bare root plant and be able to plant those. So don't forget, especially if you're planting a screen, to include those grasses, for that diversity in the landscape. And it does give home to wildlife. I mentioned that a while ago, that they can create a habitat for wildlife also. Okay. And ground covers is just something that's going to be, they're usually perennial, but they're going to grow close to the ground. That's why they call them ground covers. Common sense, I guess. But they can provide solutions for an area where maybe you're having trouble getting grass to grow, like underneath your trees where it's really shaded and there's a lot of competition. You may want to plant ground covers underneath there. And just remember, anytime you're planting underneath a tree, especially a large tree, you are disrupting their root system anytime that you plant, and you're increasing competition. So if you have big old maples that have those huge roots, just make them part of your landscape. Maybe put some ornaments and things like that out there. I had one back when I did my thesis research, and I worked with the child care centers on creating outdoor spaces for children. They had a lot of roots coming up in the ground, and we just made it into a jungle climbing area, is what we called it, because the people that come in and inspect wanted her to take down that tree because they considered the roots a tripping hazard. Well, we put little signs up, and we put little trucks, and we put little flowers here and there, and so then it turned into a play space rather than something that was considered a hazard, and they were going to make her get rid of that shade. So anyway, ground covers can act as a mulch. I like using Creeping Jenny. I guess it's Creeping Charlie's cousin. Creeping Jenny is very chartreuse green, and it will form a thick mat. And then you will not have to put mulch down in that area, and it just grows like crazy. And you can just clip it, set it down in an area, put a little bit of soil over that end, and it will take root and grow like crazy. So I've used them in containers. I've used them in like raised bed gardens, or I have basically at my place now, I have like stair steps. And that was the only place that I could find when I moved that had a little bit of soil that I could put my plants in, that I was transplanting from my house in town to out there. And so now I've got stair steps, and they're full of plants. So I kind of took up my walkway, but that was the only place to plant them. So I've got some Creeping Jenny that looks really pretty in that area. Monkey grass, that's usually what people think of first. And it's just my opinion. Some people may love monkey grass. I think it's invasive and it's hard to get rid of. Monkey grass, and there's another one. It's called a silver grass. It's in a different family, but it's almost as invasive as like Bermuda grass, because it grows with both stolons and rhizomes, above and below ground root system. And so once you get it into your beds, it's going to come up everywhere. You may plant it here and it pops up way over there somewhere, and so it's very hard to get rid of. So use those type of plants that can be invasive. Use them with caution. Not saying not use them, but maybe use less of them in the landscape and incorporate some other things in there. Because it's like other grasses. Monkey grass gets a rust disease if it's not taken care of properly. And so you just want to cut them back every spring, just like you would any other ornamental grass. Do a cleanup, break that up, clean it up, and then it'll come back nice and pretty again. But if you're not weed eating or cutting that down, then they get the rust disease and then they don't flower as well and they just look terrible. So it's all in the way that you manage it and how you use it in your landscape. So if you're thinking landscape, you're going to think of the ground cover kind of as a floor to your landscape, because we think of the landscape as an outdoor room. Okay, so you've got your floor, which is going to be some type of material, a ground cover or turf. Your trees and shrubs might be the walls. The ceiling, of course, is the sky, or maybe it's a canopy that you have, the tree canopies. So think of your room as an outdoor room when you're thinking about design. So, tropicals. I used to have a lot of tropicals, and then I get very forgetful, and I left a bunch of mine outside and they froze. So I'm gonna have to start rebuilding my collection. But I tell you, when I lost my banana trees, that must have been a hard winter, because now the banana trees just seem to survive without any problems. I haven't had to dig up banana trees or elephant ears in several years. I mean, even last year, the elephant ears came back, even after that hard December freeze. And I did not expect them to come back. And I'll have to take a picture of them because they're planted in the most awful soil, but they're huge. I mean, they've got huge leaves on them and they're just really pretty. And I've got next to a pineapple lily. I've got that purple and then the green foliage behind it. So it's kind of pretty.
I don't know about this year, but my mother has like, so he would pot them and do all that stuff. I said, I'm not old with that.
Yeah.
I did them like on the southwest side of my, right up against. So
Cool.
I think about my camera
Mm-hmm.
full with them in pot.
So she would leave them, but she'd dig them up and bring them in the fall, right?
She would, but I don't.
You okay? Okay. Yeah, survival of the fittest. There, it just depends on what type of winter that we have. You know, this the polar vortex that moved through in December. It just amazed me, some of the things that it killed, and some of the things sitting right next to it lived. I mean, the boxwoods and things like that were just hit really hard. Arborvitae, and then I see some arborvitae that just look healthier than ever. And so I would think that that's what the breeders would be looking at this year and be taking cuttings and looking at those plants that made it through that storm or that drop in temperature.
Laurels.
Yeah, laurels. That's the other one. Yeah. The laurels laurels died, but your dahlias came back. So, but the dahlias were in the ground; they were protected. You can always mulch over them, just like the elephant ears and the amaryllis and things like that. And if they're in like a microclimate where they're going to stay a little bit warmer, closer to the house, then they're more likely to survive the winters. But just in 25 years, it's amazing the changes that you see in the environment.
Still London and lime, I think it's.
Lemon and lime. Oh yeah, they're definitely tropicals. You have to bring them in. Mhm. Okay.
But to bring them in is.
Yeah.
Really dry.
Yeah, they still need sunlight.
But better than.
Yeah.
before.
Okay.
And then they lost the leaf.
Yeah, they will go into a shock, just like any other house plants that you've had sitting outside. So you might want to start cleaning those up and acclimating them and bringing them in. If you've got tropicals sitting out on your front porch or whatever, the temperatures have been getting down in the 40s at night. They're not going to be real happy with that. They're not going to die, but you never know when it's going to drop down and we're actually going to get a freeze, and then you're going to lose those house plants. So time to start cleaning those up, spraying them for bugs, washing them off, bring them in the house. But if you put your lemon and lime in a room where they get full sunlight and keep watering them, keep fertilizing them all year round, you're more than likely going to get lemons and limes at some point. Yeah.
Yep. No,
Cool.
didn't do oranges because that needed bigger outlook is.
Right.
These are
Right. You can keep the lemon and lime, and there's also a citrus disease that you want to watch with the orange. We want to keep that in Florida. But I think I've said before, we don't have any native citrus. I mean, that trifoliate orange is definitely an invasive. It's not a native plant, but it's been here for a long time, and people will make orange juice out of it, but it's not. Um, Okay, so your tropicals, they can add a lushness, a bold effect to your landscape. Put those pots out there. You can have nice decorative pots that match the brick on your house or the shutters on your house, things like that. Get a color scheme going. Put large pots out on your front porch, and that way you can change them out from season to season and have that interest going too. So, I like to buy the pots that look like concrete but are not. They're like foam, and so they're lighter weight. But even that, once you fill them with soil, they get heavy. But they have those little stools with wheels on them. You can get those, and that way you can take them inside a little bit easier, move them around and stuff. As I said, your tropicals can be wintered inside the home, a greenhouse, other protective structure. But as I said, you want to check them for bugs. Mealy bugs and aphids and things like that have been really bad this year. And so you'll want to check them and either give them a good hard wash. And you can either, after you wash them off, just spray them with water. If you see any bugs on them, look for little white spots, little bugs. Take a little cotton swab with some alcohol on it, actually wipe the underneath of the plant and wipe those bugs off. I used to take my banana trees because they were so big and put them in the shower, because sometimes, you miss a bug or two, and then all of a sudden you realize you got an infestation. And it's like, well, in the shower you go and kind of scrub them off a little bit. And
You just
yeah, you want to put some. Yeah, usually I put a plastic bag over the pot itself and tie it so that you don't get soil all going down your bathtub drain. Yes, you're right. That's a good thing to mention. So yeah, and just if you have a handheld shower, that's really really better if you can put them in the sink. But some of these large ones, I would have to just put in the shower. I really don't like using insecticides, but insecticidal soap is something that's very common. You can use that, or you can wipe them down, clean them up, things like that. So anyway, okay, tropicals. Choosing plants that are appropriate to the region. I think we talked a little bit about our climate zones, and so we are in. I need to change this. We really are in zone 7A to 7B. We don't have zone 6 anymore, so I need to update this slide set. And what that means essentially is, let me go to the next picture. Sorry, I'm seeing my notes. So the higher you go up, the lower the number is. Okay, like Canada would probably be 1 or something like that. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way down to 10. And so the higher the number, the warmer the climate, the less freezing chances that you have, things like that. So we're in zone 7A to 7B to 8, and Memphis is considered zone 8 now. So if you're living in Memphis, you can grow different things that you can grow right here in Clarksville, even though we're only 3 hours from each other. It's just because Tennessee is such a long state, and so we have all these different climates. Makes it kind of interesting. So, but we have gotten what it seems like we've gotten warmer, because Missouri, when I grew up in Missouri, it was zone 5. Missouri is zone 6 now, and we're zone 7. So everything is kind of going up 1. And so we're just little by little, we're getting warmer. So when you select your plants, when you go to your favorite nursery or garden center, make sure you check the tags, and it may say will survive from zone 5A to 7A. That would be the perfect one for this type of environment. That means that it's going to survive in our 7A climate. Now, if you pick something that says for zone 4, It's probably would be fine during the winter months, but the summers are going to be too hot for it to handle. And so vice versa. If you get a tropical plant, it would be fine to set out during the summer months when it's warm and it's above freezing. But when we get our first freeze, then that plant's gonna die off or be damaged. So,
To grow wild trees.
yes.
He was saying, if you're planting a long-lived
Mhm.
tree,
Mhm.
things are warming up,
Mhm.
probably planting like the northern red oak is not.
Oh, okay.
Just taking on
Right.
plants that are gonna live at the end of the year.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Said he's had some problems with some of the northern.
The northern red oaks. Okay, I got you. Right, right. So you'd probably want a southern red oak, probably more adapted to. Okay, we'll have to I'll start paying attention to see if those are the ones that are dying off in our area, because we've lost a lot of oak trees over the past several years, just kind of due to climate change, drought, heat. They develop a disease called hypoxylon canker, and then that just starts taking them down. I mean, it's nothing that you can really do anything about it, not in a forested situation anyway. But if you have a landscape tree, you can always water it through the droughty periods and baby it along and stuff. But selection, looking at those correct varieties is very important. But looking at your site before you ever put a plant in the ground is very important, and sketching out some type of a landscape design, even if it's just bubbles on graph paper. Okay. You're going to mark where your house is, and you're going to mark where, maybe you have an existing oak tree here and a dogwood here, whatever. You're going to mark those existing features along with where your house is, if you have a shed or a barn, things like that. Just kind of write it out on paper where they're at, and then start watching during the summer, where do they get the most sunlight? Okay, if you want to put full sun plants out, you're going to start marking those areas. Okay, this gets at least 8 hours of full sun. Maybe you have a semi-shaded area and you notice that, okay, it gets morning sun, but no afternoon, maybe about 4 hours of morning sun, and then it's in the shade in the afternoon. And then you start picking your plant species to go into that environment. Because if you put a shade plant in the sun, what's going to happen? It's going to burn up. Okay. And if you put a sun loving plant in the shade, it's just going to get long and leggy, and it's not going to bloom the way that you want to because it doesn't have the right conditions to grow. So you need to find that environment that meets the needs of the plants rather than the plant that you want to grow in that area. So identify problem areas. Like I said, most people I tell just grab you either sheet of paper, or I like graph paper just because it kind of condenses things down a little bit, and just start marking those areas. You may have a wet area where you have drainage problems, and well, you're going to know to either amend your soil, build that up to where it's not holding water, or build a rain garden. You're going to select garden plants, trees that don't mind having wet feet, that like a wet soil, and plant those in that area, and they're going to thrive. But and then if you have a dry area or a hard pan, you're going to want to plant plants that can take drought, that have more of a shallow root system, things of that nature. So you really want to take a good walk around your property and note these different areas and the situations that you're going to have to deal with. And you can do that while you're pulling your soil samples, because you may just want to examine the soil samples. And if it starts looking really different from the front yard to the backyard, then you might need to do 2 soil samples. Okay, pull your small, like pull them like we talked about, but go ahead and submit 2 different soil samples. So if you start noticing a distinct difference in color, in texture, then at that point you might want to send in a couple different soil tests for those areas. And also utilizing that USDA web soil survey. I think we talked about it when Hebron taught the class. Using that can help you identify what your parent soil is, what your water holding capacity is, whether it's, like they'll say prime farmland or not prime farmland, things of that nature. So you can get a lot of information from that USDA web soil survey too. So when you're laying out your gardens and your landscape plants, you'll know what kind of soils you're dealing with. And
When you're laying out your grid, one mistake that I'm guilty of too is you start a garden, you've got small plants. Oh, this goes good here, and this beside it, but
Mhm.
you don't consider the mature size.
yes,
And you see these houses with big trees
Mhm.
growing right up against them,
hmm
so be sure to take in mature size on.
that is exactly right. And I see the what I call land scrapers. They do that all the time. And there's a typical. You'll have a holly, you'll have some boxwood or Japanese Hellerii holly, and you'll have nandina. Those are your contractor plants, and a few clumps of lirope. As a new homeowner, I would pull all that stuff out and just start over again. And because usually the hollies, an American holly or even a Foster holly, is going to get pretty wide and tall, and they're planted within 3 feet of your foundation. I mean, you've got to come out quite a ways. I mean, if you look at a plant that's going to have maybe a 30-foot wide canopy, that's got to go at least 15 foot from your house. Okay, it doesn't go 3 foot from the corner where it's going to be, and your guttering is going to be growing into your foundation, causing problems. At least half of its mature canopy is how far you go away from the house with that plant. But it looks so good when it's small. But 10, 20 years, you're going to be saying, why did I plant that thing so close?
When you find out that it was a magnolia,
Oh.
this is little,
Oh yeah, or if it was mismarked, yeah, it might not be a little gem. It could be a southern magnolia or something like that. That does happen in nurseries. You get the wrong variety, or like when I first moved down here, I put Burford holly. They were supposed to be dwarf Burford holly in the front of our house in town. And it didn't take me, I guess, about 5 years to figure out these monsters were not the dwarf variety, and they were just mismarked, at the garden center where we got them. So they looked pretty for a few years, but then they ended up having to come out because they just grew into the house. So, but okay. Another thing, locate utility lines, both above and below ground. I know a lot of our newer neighborhoods, they have below ground utilities, which is good, but you still want to know that they're there. Do the call 811, call before you dig, have them come out and mark all your utility lines, your water lines. You want to know where your septic tank is. You want to know where your lateral lines are. And you don't plant anything on top of that but grass. Okay. You do not want to mess up your septic system. And have to have that mess pumped out all the time. And, the system works great when it works, but if you go planting trees and those roots go getting into your lateral lines and the septic system, you're going to have problems. So just avoid planting anything except for grass over those areas. The utility lines above ground, I was driving. Let's see, I've made two trips to Jackson in the last few days. But I was going along, and there was the whole whole line of trees that had just been topped by the utility company, and I swear they were planted in line with the utility line directly under them, and so they had been topped, rounded off, and looked horrible. And I had to see them twice. I was like, oh, but yeah, just locate your utility lines. And just come to understand, growing gardening is trial and error sometimes. You just have to look at the plants that you want and look at the growing conditions that you can provide and try to do the best you can. I mean, everybody likes loropetalum. Sometimes they're fine, other times they're very short-lived. I mean, I'm surprised that the loropetalums made it through that hard freeze, but a lot of them did, and they came back from the roots. But
One of my
one of yours did? Okay. They're a very pretty plant. I love the maroon colored foliage, and then they have a little purple flower on them. nice little plant. But don't. Yeah, I've had a lot of questions on what should we plant to avoid, losing them in another freeze like that. Well, who's to say the next time we're going to get a polar vortex come through where it drops 50 degrees within 12 hours? How often does that happen? It's happened once in my lifetime, and that was this year. But if you look at those plants that are zoned 5 or 6, or it says moderate survival rate in zone 7, something like that, those things that are on the edge, you're more than likely going to lose during a hard winter. So planting native plants, planting those that are tried and true, that have adapted to our environment, is going to be a good idea. But I'm not going to tell somebody, no, don't plant loropetalum just because the polar vortex killed them last year. It may not happen again for years. And if you like loropetalum, go ahead and plant them, And that's something that makes good, is good for cut flowers. Since you do cut flower and arrangements, the purple is really nice. So okay, so just understand that your growing site and the plant material is going to involve trial and error, amending that soil. I know I pushed on that last week. A lot of organic matter in your soil is always good. You want a happy place for those roots to grow, and then a little mulch, and you should be good to go. Okay, so this terminology on light, full sun, partial sun, dappled sun, full shade. What does all this mean when you read it on the label? So essentially we can say full sun is going to be 6 full hours of sun or more per day. I mean, those plants are going to need full sun for a minimum of 6 hours, but they could use more. Okay. If you see a plant labeled for partial sun, partial shade, those terms are kind of used interchangeably, and they can survive with 3 to 6 hours of direct sun and then shade the rest of the day, and they'll still be okay. Kind of like a hydrangea. A hydrangea likes the morning sun, that's the preferred area, and then afternoon shade gives it a little relief during the summer months.
That's what I wanted to ask. Like when it says that, does it matter morning sun versus like for hydrangea? It does.
It does. Yes. 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 So if you have something that needs partial sun, partial shade, yeah, you're going to want to avoid planting it where it's going to get the sun and the heat of the day. So yeah. And then dappled sun is like when you're kind of like when you're walking through the woods and you have the canopy of the trees, but you can still, there's light coming through and you can see, little ferns and other wildflowers, the native wildflowers growing and things like that. So that's kind of dappled sun, would be a woodland garden. Full shade would be less than 3 hours of direct sunlight. In a situation like that, you're going to have a hard time finding things that will grow, but they will. If you just start taking some walks in nature and, take pictures of the plants that you're seeing, and you can incorporate that into your landscape. Or if you have a area with trees and you want to make it more natural, just start taking note. If you go to your Rotary Park or on other nature walks, look at those plants that are growing in really low shade areas. Take a picture, get it identified, see if you can find it, and plant it if you have a similar location. So that's just kind of how we learn our plants and where they go. So, but yeah, full shade means essentially no sun. And there's not very many plants except for mushrooms that will survive and grow in the dark. But mushrooms can be really cool too. So. But they are in process of decay, so something's going on there. So the light exposure that the site receives is going to dictate the plants that can be used. So don't be determined to tell this plant that you've bought and you paid $150 for, you're going to live where I want you to plant, or where I want to plant you. It's not going to work. It's going to argue with you. And it will tell you that it's not happy where it's at. So no matter what you do to it, it's not going to be happy until you give it the environment that it wants rather than what you want, I guess. So, But annuals and perennials, there are full sun annuals and there's full shade annuals and perennials both. And they just need the certain environment to make sure that they flower and stay nice and green and not get all leggy and have little bee flowers and things like that. So you want to have, you can create kind of a plant palette and say, again, we talked about having a room, an outdoor room. Well, you think of it as an empty palette and you want to fill that with colors. Some people may like a lot of different colors. You may like bright oranges and yellows and reds. And then some other people might be very picky and, okay, I want a shade of purple and I want a lighter shade of purple and I want a violet, and so whatever you like is what you put in your environment and your landscape and what looks nice. So you may choose, different shades of red, shades of purple, orange, whatever. Or like me, I just kind of not, I tend to be a throw everything out there, marigolds, I like reds, I like purples, I like everything. I like it bright. So it's just what you like. So sun-loving plants need at least 6 hours of sun each day to reach their full potentials. If they receive less light, they're going to be poorly flowering. They're going to be stretched. They're going to be kind of leggy and have weak stems. And then, of course, shade-loving plants, you put them out in the sun and they're going to get scorched. Okay, we got a question here. What do I do with elephant ears in pots? The elephant ears in pots, what I would probably do is wait until after the first frost and cut them back and just move the whole pot itself indoors or to a protected area. So, okay, site selection, soil and bed preparation. I know we've beaten this one down. Soil is the most important thing in the landscape. We want a soil that is well drained, high in organic matter. That's going to be ideal. You have to create that with our Tennessee soils. So it'll be a matter of adding compost, doing those cover crops, digging them in, things like that will improve the soil over time. And then, your plants, do a couple years with maybe annuals and dig them in, and then choose your permanent crops that you want to plant, like your landscape trees and shrubs and perennials. So what this is showing here, kind of usually what I like to do is till up an area, and I don't really like to till, but you do usually have to till at least once to break the ground. And then I will measure the area and put at least 3 to 4 inches of compost over that entire area, and then lightly till it in again or double dig it by using a broad fork or a pitchfork, some type of tool. So, but I'm constantly adding organic matter into the soil and mix it with the parent soil. But like when I'm planting annuals or I'm planting my vegetable garden, I'll be dragging along a bag of some type of potting soil. Like I said, BMX, the bales of BMX with mycorrhiza is one of my favorites. It's more expensive, but it does have that mycorrhiza, that fungal organism in there that if it does set down and it hooks to the roots of your plants, that's going to make the nutrients more available to the plant itself. But again, happy place for the roots to grow.
Herbaceous ornamental. They'll have the same little, in potting mold or mix it with native soil.
I would, when you're adding amendments, I would mix it in with the native planting soil, like we've seen in this picture here. They have tilled up that whole bed and put the amendments on, because they're planting that whole landscape bed. If you're just doing like one tree, one hole, or one plant, one hole, you can probably just dig out the parent soil, mix it up with some potting mix, try to get it in the same structure. Try to get the clods out, the rocks out, and then put all that back together around the plant when you put it in the soil. So really, we're looking at a larger area. So you're amending that whole area. So
Had vegetable garden, pulled up a lot of tomatoes to mix that into the topsoil. And then I went in today to look at it and my topsoil.
Mhm.
So I buy the topsoil now. Wait till spring.
Um, Probably what I would do. Do you have a fairly decent soil?
Yeah, I actually was digging.
I mean, it may have just sunk a little bit from, we had a little bit of rain. Yeah, yeah. I would probably plant a cover crop. I would probably plant a cover crop, put you out some greens, some turnips, radishes. Yeah, yeah. You've just got a few days left. But put a cover crop on it and then just mow that down and till it under next spring. And that's going to build up your soil structure better than bringing in a strange topsoil and mixing it in. Either that or get a load of compost and put it down. But I was still,
I was just saying, because I noticed the dirt.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it probably. I mean, your roots are down in there, and they've messed with those aggregates, and you've got pores in the soil, and it probably just kind of sank down with the last rain. After you pulled everything up, you pulled the roots and all that, and it's loosened everything up, and so it's going to sink a little bit. So that's normal, But to rebuild that soil, you could either get a load of compost and work that in, or do a cover crop. But it's so important to keep that area covered so that you're not losing soil over the winter and when we have our spring rains before you can get back in there and plant. So if you have a mixture, like I said, turnip greens, things like that are one of the easiest ones. I like turnips or radishes because they grow down and they work their way through that clay. And then when the first frost comes along or a couple frosts, it will kill them back, and then they decay. And then all your microorganisms are in there feeding on that, and they break it down. And you just get a healthier soil overall.
Well, there was some seeds over there that stuff. It's great to put in.
No, you need to get them in before. I mean, October 15th is our cutoff date, but usually I go through about October 30th, through November 1st.
So I can grass some of the seeds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's going to happen? I mean, if you plant them now, and we're all taking a risk. Like I said, I'm late myself on getting them out there. What your risk is it's going to take them 7 to 14 days to germinate. Okay. And then, so if they come up and they're little bitty plants and we get a hard freeze, boom, they could be gone. Just
Or
mustards will take it. Yeah.
they're not that. It's really
Right.
just
Yeah.
a little here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Lettuce too.
Not just having, good soil and having stretch well, potatoes are just.
Other thing, those little garden rats are good, and like tillage rats. Tillage rats, they get great big, this long and this big around. They really have full of
Mhm.
far.
It depends. I mean, like I said, the first time I did it, I had some, I forget what kind of, I think they were just icicle radishes. They just grew. I mean, they were humongous. The tops coming out of the ground were like this. And then after a couple freezes, they really started to decay. And of course, I'm out there with my little flashlight looking down in the hole to see how far down that it went, because I wanted to see what was going on in the soil. So yeah, it just depends on how big that radish gets before it gets killed off. And carrots will last throughout the winter. You plant them now, harvest them in the spring. So garlic, carrots, onions, things like that you can put out right now along with your greens and your radishes and stuff. So you should still have time, because we'll get what's called an Indian summer. after the freeze, it'll warm up again, and so we still have a little bit of wiggle room. But once we get into November and December, then you're pretty much out except for planting your bulbs and bulb-like crops. So, okay. Oops. Okay, so we know that the organic matter, the reason you're using that is it does provide some nutrients, but it's really building up that soil structure so the nutrients are easily taken up by the plant. It helps with moisture retention, but it also makes good air and water movement, and that promotes root health and plant productivity. So, and you increase it by adding compost or manures, and by the use of, it should say living mulches or what we call manure crops. And that would be like your radishes that you just till over. You don't mean to eat them, you're not planning, you can eat some of them. It depends on if you like radishes and greens and mustards and all that. But that would be called a manure crop because it's a live crop that you're just tilling under. Um, yeah. And some plants, especially vegetables, your beets do not like a lot of organic matter. I've had trouble growing beets in raised beds that have just like a potting mix soil in it. They need more real soil in there than just the potting mix, or they tend to rot and they get little bugs that eat the top out of them. And so the ones that we've grown in our community garden in those raised beds, I think wherever we're going to plant beets is we need to add some more real topsoil in there because they don't like all that organic matter. It causes them to rot. It causes kind of a scale, kind of like a little disease, get all scabby looking. But
brings up a point that you, particularly for her, got raised bed.
Mhm.
Because compost is not stable and fully decomposed. Probably definitely be better to put that on in the fall.
yes.
And if it is fully stable and decomposed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so you'll want to be definitely, if you haven't yet, do your soil sampling now. And if you have to add lime, I mean, it takes time for that to make a reaction and, chemically, in that chemical reaction to occur and to change the pH of your soil. Or if you need sulfur, again, it takes time. So usually we recommend get those done in the fall, get your amendments put on so that it will have time to sit and react in the soil and make those changes that you need. So, okay. Let's see. Before planting, you're going to remove or kill any unnecessary vegetation from the site. We have talked solarization before, and essentially, if you're using solarization, it has to be done through the heat of the summer. Okay, so you're putting an area out of production by covering it with a clear plastic, making sure that you have sandbags. They work the best to seal the edges, and you want that soil to get up above 180 degrees for several months, and that's going to kill out a lot of your hard to kill weeds. It's going to get rid of some of the weed seeds and some of the disease organisms. It just depends on how hot that you can get it. So it can be used in a number of different ways, the soil solarization. But the only problem is, it puts that area out of production during the summer months. So to put out clear plastic right now, it's not really going to do any good. Putting out black plastic right now, it may kill it on the surface, but those roots are not being killed, and it's going to come right back up. And I know even during the summer, we had a roofer come, and we had the steel or aluminum roof put on, and they laid that aluminum out all over my yard. It was in the summer, and they went to pick it back up, and so I had all these dead spots in my yard, and of course I was kind of tripping out a little bit, and I had a feeling that it would come back, and they did. So So it has to be left on there for a long time, and the temperatures have to get hot enough to kill the actual root system and kill the weed seeds and things like that. So
If you're doing it manually,
Mhm.
obviously there's a thick kind of layer of grass.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
How much of the roots do you need to remove?
Try to get as much of the root system as possible, or expose the roots. Like if you know there's a freeze coming up or there's going to be a really hot day, that is one natural way to kind of kill those grasses in the roots. You flip them over and expose their feeder roots, and it will kill them. And then you just kind of rake off that debris, and you can put it in your compost pile and let it break down and such. So
And I feel like I remember at one point someone saying, don't shake the soil out of these. But then at the same time.
yeah, with
With
sedge.
we're talking about 7,000 years to make an inch of topsoil.
Yeah, yeah.
It's precious material.
Right, exactly. I tend to shake. I tend to shake when I weed. Yeah, because there'll be a big clump of soil, and I don't want to throw that soil out, and so it gets kind of tedious at times. So, it just depends on how much time and trouble you want to spend on it.
What I tend to do is, if I'm doing a new bed and there's grass, I want to get rid of it. Spray Roundup,
Mhm.
because it'll go into the roots. Then I dig it up and I feel more confident
Mhm.
that I've gotten it all away.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I want to share something that I learned at the Western Region Master Gardener Conference last week. Troy Martin was one of our speakers, and so he was tasked with talking about controversial things, pesticides and home remedies and things like that in the landscape. And he did address the Roundup issue. We've heard a lot of things that have not been scientifically proven about Roundup. Okay. And especially if you use a pesticide correctly with the proper clothing, keeping it off your skin, washing afterwards, washing your clothes, just following what they call PPE on the label. And one thing is about Roundup is that if it does not connect to a chlorophyll molecule, then it's not going to kill the plant. Okay. And the chlorophyll molecule, once the Roundup molecule collects on there, it collects onto that chlorophyll, and it does take it through the plant to the root, and then it dissipates. It does not have any action in the soil. Soil does not have chlorophyll. Okay. So Roundup, its active ingredient, has to attach to an active chlorophyll molecule, something that's alive and moving. So there is no residual left in the soil. Okay, that's what I've been taught. Okay, now, how many of you have heard about the vinegar, Epsom salts, and vinegar, Epsom salts, and soap? Usually, like Dawn soap. Okay, all right. He went over where they had done research that kills more soil microorganisms than Roundup does. Because vinegar is an acid, Epsom salt is a salt. Okay. And a lot of our pesticides do have salts in them too, and so do our fertilizers. But salt is basically a killer in the soil. And so think about what happens when you put salt on a worm or a slug. Okay. What do? They don't like it. So that's what happens when you use like those home mixtures on your soil. I mean, it's going to kill the top part, but you're really killing more active microorganisms by using that than you would be using a pesticide like Roundup by following the label directions. You know, 2 ounces does not mean that 4 ounces is going to make it better. Okay. They've tested this stuff, and that's why the label directions are on there. And so if you exceed the label directions, yes, you're putting yourself at risk. Just like anything else in life. You eat too much, you're going to gain too much weight, you'll be obese, you're going to have health problems. Or if you don't eat enough, you're going to be lacking in nutrients. So use the things correctly, and follow the label directions and things like that. So So anyway, okay, getting back to this. Okay, you can remove the vegetation manually. You can use a shovel, a spade, or you can spray with a pesticide type product. Or we can do the solarization during the summer. And then once you've gone through that period where you've either removed all the weeds and such, then you would take your soil test at that time before you add any lime or any other amendments. And remember, we talked about weed and feeds or a no-no, okay? Because you're probably not applying the right thing at the right time, and you don't know how much nutrients your soil needs and how much you're actually putting out. So stay away from the weed and feeds. But usually you till the area down to about an 8-inch depth, rake it, remove any rocks or debris to make it a level surface, then add that 2 or 3 inches of organic matter and lightly till that in again. And that's going to improve the overall soil structure. And then some of the best amendments for your clay soil are going to be your pine bark, humus, composted leaf molds, manures, grass clippings, etc. You want to make sure that all of these products are composted completely, because if you put in grass clippings and they have seed heads on them, you're going to have grass. Okay, you're going to have different types of seeds popping up. Manure, we've talked about that, that it can possibly have pesticide residues in it that will actually kill your garden plants, your tomatoes and peppers and things like that. So you just have to be careful about where you get your manure, and if you work with a local farmer, ask them what they've applied to their fields if you can. And making your own is going to be your best bet, because you know what you're putting into your compost pile and you know what you're taking. So here was a interesting experiment at a church that I used to go to. And I was tasked with, after the church burnt down and we built the new church, to put in a landscape. And so I had a landscape design drawn out. And so this area right here that you're looking at, where you see the nice green grass next to the building, that was supposed to be left bare and amended, because we were planting trees, shrubs along in there. And the main seed was supposed to be out there where you see all that dead grass. So, the contractor, the other person at the church working on the project, didn't listen, didn't follow directions. And so I didn't want to lose all that good grass. And so we rented what was called a sod cutter. If you ever run a sod cutter, you'll probably never do it again. But yeah, we went along there and pulled off that top layer of sod. And then we had another group of people that were taking the sod and putting them in blank areas, like where you see where there's dead grass and stuff like that. There were areas all around the church, and we moved that and we watered it in. So we kind of made our own sod. It was a lot of work, but it lasted for a few years until everything got overgrown with weeds. And then we did put our landscape plants in next to the church. But those are heavy, they were wet, and that machine is very hard to work with. So you got to have somebody muscles to use that. But that is one option. Okay, so this is kind of like a perk test. If you need to check your soil to see how well it's draining, you're going to dig a hole approximately 12 inches deep, 12 inches wide, and then you're going to fill that hole with water and let it drain. See how long it takes it to drain. If you and then you want to repeat it one more time. So if the water does not drain in less than an hour, it definitely needs improvement. I would probably leave this overnight and see how long it took it to drain. If that hole is still full of water the next morning, you've definitely got drainage issues, okay? Because it may take 2 or 3 hours for that water to actually work its way down through the soil. So basically, you're just looking at it and seeing how long it takes for the water to drain. So you really want it to be drained within 3 to 6 hours. It's going to be your best well-drained soil.
Doing the soil is drying on that, right?
Right. Yeah, just do it when it's an average. Yeah, the soil's not really wet, not dried out. Okay. All right. Well, now you're ready to start planting your plants, and you chose your annuals or perennials and spacing. So one thing is to look at the tag and note the mature height and width of the plant that you're planting. Okay, and it will usually give you spacing recommendations. If you're really wanting to make impact, maybe you've got an annual bed and you want people to drive by 40 mile an hour to see this red, just eye-catching flower bed, then you're just going to mass it with red plants. You could do things like that, or yellow, whatever your favorite color is. But the thing of it is that you don't want to plant them like little soldiers all in one row. You're going to stagger them. And this goes with your perennials too, so that they will fill in that space. And again, you're covering the ground surface. You get less weeds and they will fill in better. And so if you look at the picture up here, we do one row and then we come back and we're centering the next row. So if that was maybe an 8 to 10 inch spacing, you would put them out at that space. Then your next row, you're going to go in between each plant rather than right in front of them in a straight row. Okay, for the most part. Now, if you're doing a specific design that calls for straight rows, then you're going to put them a little closer in straight rows. Like if you're doing maybe American flag or something specific like that, then you would go in straight rows. Okay, but just typically, if you're making a bed that's going to be seen maybe from a distance, and you just want that color to pop, you're going to stagger those plantings. And if you have different varieties, just check the spacing recommendations and kind of get an average. If it says 8 to 10 inches or 6 to 8 inches, you might choose 8 inches on all of them. So, but again, the idea is that at maturity, and this bed is not matured yet, but in a couple months, all those plants will be mounded. They'll cover that soil area. They'll be big and nice and pretty, but they won't be just like dash, dash, dash right on top of each other. Yeah. Just some design hints here. Your ground covers are going to provide brush strokes, background of background color. They're really providing the floor of your outdoor landscape room, and they can be used to outline a bed. They could be thought as part of the whole composition of that landscape bed, an element for contrast or to complement the other plants that are growing in there. And that's when your color variations come in. And you think of your blues and your oranges, your brights and your lighter colors. But gray is a color too in the landscape. The silver, like Dusty Miller. Your silvers, your ones that don't really have flowers, but they have color. They have meaning in the landscape too. That kind of adds that neutral. As your eye moves through the landscape, you may have red, then have kind of a lighter color, and then maybe another brighter color. And it just makes it easier for the eye to work its way through the landscape and notice each plant for its individual characteristics. Hmm. Yeah, when you're doing a bouquet. Exactly. And then if you want a vertical accent, of course, you're going to use taller plants. Joe Pyeweed, and I've noticed the Joe Pyeweed has been really pretty this year. My pasture, or what I have, well, I don't really have pastures, but around me, I've seen a lot of the Joe Pyeweed, purple coneflower, foxglove, dill, ornamental grasses, the tall phlox. You would consider those as the background, and your taller trees and shrubs, that would kind of be the background of your landscape or a wall. And then you're going to just come down, depending on your view, you're going to, of course, come from taller to shorter. And then it's nice to have some cascading or weeping type plants, especially if you have flower beds that are, or flower boxes that are hooked up to your porch or your windows and things like that. It's always nice to have something that flows out as well as a flowering plant in there. So some of the cascading or weeping things that you might use are perennial vina or verbena, or there is an annual verbena. The ornamental sweet potato vine, vinca vine, that would just be some suggestions for vines. If you want a rounded shrubby form, the Artemisia, which again is going to be kind of a neutral color, that silver gray. Rosemary has kind of a silverish, well, more of a green gray look to it. Catnip and catmint, sage, perennial salvias. And don't be afraid to incorporate using edible herbs within the landscape. I like edible landscapes. When I built the one that I did out at my farm, everything had a purpose. Okay, it was either for a function, for shade, for cooling, or to block a view. I have several of those planted. I wouldn't have to see the neighbors, certain trees but I would also each year in my front yard in what would be considered the formal foundation plantings, there were vegetables growing, there were annual flowers, there were things like that all mixed in with my perennial plants and my woody plants. So again, it was very massed together. It was very thick, not a lot of weeds, things like that. So, but yeah, I like to, this is, Vinca vine is kind of you want it to have room to just kind of take over because it can be very invasive. But there's Vinca vine, and then there's what we call bedding plant Vinca. Bedding plant Vinca is just an annual, and it's really good for droughty areas. If you have a hot, dry area, once you plant the bedding plant Vinca, you'll water it a couple times, and it doesn't want water anymore. It will actually just blah at you if you try to water it too much. It just going to do, the opposite of what you expect it to do.
Well, I have, basil.
Mhm.
It's one, I didn't even- It's flowering like nuts. I can't. Well, phosphorus
Yeah,
and
basil.
on.
Yeah, basil is kind of a tender. It's a tender annual. It will not take frost, but you can dry them.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna pour it. I just want.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't like to eat it? No.
Like, that's.
Yeah.
Well, I'll bring it in for you.
Yeah, but just for you on Zoom, we were having a conversation about basil, and basil is going to be killed out with the first freeze, but there's a lot of things that you can do with it up to that point. Let it flower and let it continue to feed the bees, but you can also just pull the plants up, and I clip off roots and then hang them upside down to dry, and then I just skim the leaves off, and I do it the simple way. I just put it in my hands over a paper plate like this, and then I have different containers, baby food jars. Back when they made baby food jars, now they make these silly plastic things with a lid that don't go back on. So mason jars, things like that you can store those dried herbs in. And so I'll make basil, oregano, and dried garlic combinations, and I use that to cook with. You can also freeze them. A lot of people will put them like in ice trays. Anybody remember what ice trays are? But you can put them old fashioned, yeah. But you can put your herbs into an ice tray and fill it with a little bit of water and freeze them. And especially like mint or something that you would like to use in drinks and stuff like that. You'd have that, and you could just put it in, in a glass of tea, and that would make mint tea. So a lot of different things you can do, or just work them back into the soil, and they're adding that organic matter back to the soil. So here's just a few pictures of some ground covers. I like the sedum. I like the hyacinths. Those are good for rock gardens. I'm planning on using some of the lower growing sedum in my rock property. I guess it's not just a bed; it's a rock property. It's all over. But your native plants like your coneflower, and I am not sure what's back in that background back there. But you can see just an assortment of plants to make up your outdoor room. All right, planting times. In Tennessee, the average last frost is April 15th. Again, this is data I think that needs to be studied and updated, but I'm still going by what is the current research recommendations. Tennessee, our average last frost date is April 15th. In the last few years, it's been a lot later than that. I've even, into May. And when it happens in late April and May, you kill off your fruit crops and things like that can be really detrimental.
Tennessee or the mountains in East?
The East Tennessee, this is for our area. Yeah. I think the 25th is actually Clarksville, Nashville. Okay, so cold hardy annuals. You have 2 times of year that you can plant those. And so if you've planted pansies and things like that in the spring, they'll die out very quickly. So if you can go ahead and plant them in the fall. And what I like to do or like to recommend is that you plant your bulbs and then put your pansies on top of that. And then when your bulbs start to come up in the spring, the pansies are starting to liven up and you can throw a little fertilizer, clean them up a little bit, and then you're way ahead of your neighbors. And you got this excellent show of daffodils and pansies, and they'd be like, "Where'd that come from?" And so you're a season ahead of everybody else. But they do work good together. And then, once the pansies when it gets hot, they'll start dying back. And when you're like if you have daffodils or whatever, once those leaves start to turn yellow, and you can go ahead and cut those back, but let them die back naturally. I don't remember if I go over that in this presentation because I took some things out. But your spring bulbs, you need to leave them be until they die back naturally, and then either mow over them or cut them back. But you don't want to take them and while they're green and wrap them up, put rubber bands around them. Have you ever seen people do that? I hadn't seen anything like that till I moved to Tennessee, and but that keeps the plant from going through photosynthesis, and so it does no good to bind them up. You want them to go through photosynthesis as long as they can, and then those nutrients will go down into the bulb, and then that feeds your flower for the next year. Make sure that you've got good flowering for the next year. So don't cut them back too soon. Wait until they start to turn yellow and look kind of yucky, but don't bind them up or anything like that. So,
That's
okay.
because I'm really not a bulb person.
Okay.
And Candy, so right now you're putting bulbs in the ground.
Mhm.
I'm putting pansy plants or pansy seed
I usually use plants.
plants.
Mhm.
Okay, so they're gonna stay alive until they get killed by the cold, but then they'll come back.
Well, usually the pansies won't get killed completely, and you can always mulch them. If you know the polar vortex is coming, you may want to mulch that bed. But most of the time, pansies will live throughout the winter. They may look puny, but as long as their roots stay alive and they're in pretty good soil, they will start to perk up as soon as the weather warms up a little bit. And, then, like I said, your bulbs are going to come up in between them because most of your bulbs, are going to go pretty deep. Your daffodils, the recommendation is like if you have a 4-inch bulb, you're going to plant it 8 inches deep. If you have a 2-inch bulb, you're going to plant it 4 inches deep. So twice as deep as the diameter of the bulb. So if it's a really small bulb, about an inch around, it's going to go 2 inches in the ground. Such like that. That's kind of another rule of thumb.
And then the
So.
bulb, the daffodil,
Mhm.
a flower,
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna die back.
Yeah.
Then you wanna dig it up?
No.
Oh,
No.
you don't dig it up?
No. You leave
You
it there.
ever dig them up?
You don't dig them up. No.
Never.
Never ever. Not unless you're ready to divide them. If they get too thick and they need to be divided and moved and transplanted, then you dig them up and you break them into pieces. And
Have you not been tied to the same?
No, that's why I was so confused. Like the daffodils are like all along the road. I'm going my
Mhm.
daughter's home. I know they're just there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought you could do.
No, now there are some tender bulbs, like we talked about the elephant ears, the tuberous begonias, the calla lilies, that are tender bulbs that you would need to go ahead and dig because they will freeze or they will rot and die in our clay soil.
That's the exception.
Yeah. Tulips, Oh yeah, daffodils just keep reproducing, and then that way, if you dig them up, you just separate the bulbs, the little bulblets, and you just plant them wherever you want to, just to spread them out.
It's worth mentioning too, that what she said about the depth of the bulb,
Mhm.
is the same for seeds too.
That is true.
Plant the squash seed, like, you can plant like
Right.
phases.
Right.
Different phases.
Yeah.
different phases.
That is a good point. Let me. Right. So for you Zoom folks, we were having a little conversation, like I said, on the bulbs, about how deep you're going to plant them is like 2 times as deep as the diameter of the bulb. The seeds are the same way. If you've got basil seeds that are just really, really, really small, you're just going to sprinkle them over the soil surface, kind of pat them in, water them in, and but if you have a squash seed, then it's going to go about 2 times as deep as the diameter of the seed. I'm saying that correctly. um, okay, so like I said, the cold hardy annuals, you have 2 different times. You can plant them in the fall. You can plant them in the spring. And then warm season annuals, you want to wait until after our frost free date, usually somewhere around mid-April. And biennials and perennials, if you're going to divide those, you want to do those in the fall. About right now is when you're cleaning up your perennials. You're starting to cut them back. If your irises need to be divided, or if your bulbs, need to be dug up. A lot of the daffodils you need to do right after they have bloomed and start to die back, because they'll die back completely and you'll forget where they are unless you mark them and you mark what the color is and things like that. You can do that. But either on the perennials, uh, replant them, dig, divide in the fall or early spring. You just want to get them back in the ground so they can get a root system established. Now, containerized perennials can be planted any time of the year, provided that enough water is available. This is really more toward trees and shrubs. If we think about containerized plants, I don't like to plant anything in July and August. Okay, if I have to, I have to. If you've got a new house and you need some things out there, but if you can wait until the right conditions, because just the heat of the year, whether it's in a container, a balled and burlap, or a seed, it's not going to do well during the hot and driest part of the year. So, and I already went over this, that the perennials should be divided during spring or fall so that those plants become established before they experience the hot summer temperatures. If you've got annuals in pots, and they're like right now, you've got warm season annuals in decorative pots. You'll want to start pulling them off or wait until the first frost. It's up to you. And then plant back with cool season. You can do your ornamental kales, your pansies, your snapdragons, things like that for over the winter months. You can even add in these containers, maybe an ornamental tree, maybe a little Alberta spruce, and then put some flowers around it. Those should look real pretty in a container. And, then you can decorate them as it gets closer to Thanksgiving and Christmas, and you can add other things that, follow a good color scheme, or how you're decorating for Thanksgiving and Christmas season.
So when you think about this idea, I bought a penny, I think it must have been in summer. And the lady at the Irish city, like that, plant in the ground in the fall. And then in the fall, take it up and then plant it in the soil, because the pot keeps the roots cooler and moist.
As long as you remember to go back and take it out of the pot and don't forget that you've done that, yes, I think it would be fine. But I have actually gone on home visits where I have found trees that were doing poorly and go digging through the mulch and the pot sticking up out of the ground. And they were like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to take that plastic pot. Yes, you take the pot off, you take the little plastic bag off, whatever kind of packaging they're using. Yes, you've got to take that off when you plant plants. So.
How do you keep a straight face when you deliver?
Oh, it's tough. It's tough. Usually I'm just shaking my head. But buying plants, I mean, I know everybody likes to go to the discount part of the store, and sometimes that is okay. You'll find some good deals. But if you go to the discount rack and you buy a bunch of flowers that are marked down and they look sickly, keep them separate from your plants for a while, or you're going to incorporate. She knows. Yeah. Yeah. No. They're not trained.
They just throw it on the can strap and like, oh, somebody will buy it.
Yep, they will. And they will, and they will. And those, they can be okay. I mean, because, sometimes, especially with pansies and some of your bedding plants, the watering that happens at a garden center is not as well as it could be. You have to train people to water plants appropriately, not just kind of go along like this. Yeah, they go along like this and they think they're doing okay, and no water is getting down to the soil of those plants. So, but you can end up with root rot diseases. You can bring in bugs. So take those things, put them in quarantine, spray them with some insecticidal soap, clean them up, make sure they don't have any bugs. If they perk back up and they look healthy, then go ahead and plant them, within your landscape. But don't just bring them home and directly put them in there, because you could be incorporating a problem into your landscape. And if you get a bedding plant with like Phytophthora root rot or Rhizoctonia, those things live in the soil and they stay in the soil forever. And there's a lot of plants that are susceptible to that type of disease, the root rot disease. So you just don't want to incorporate that in there. But one of the secret to success in gardening is choosing plants that grow in harmony with each other, with the garden and the landscape conditions that you have available for them. Selecting plants, just some little tips. Select plants that are uniform and balanced to the size of the container. Just make sure that they look right. Sometimes if you go to the nursery, and I think Katie mentioned this when she taught trees, check your shrubs and your trees that are in containers before you buy them, because a lot of times they will take them out of a 1 gallon container, put them in a 3 gallon container and put some more soil in there with them, but you've still got a 1 gallon container plant there, but they're selling them to you at a 3 gallon price. But, if they would do this early on where, the roots could spread out into that 3 gallon pot, it would be okay. But most of them do it as a last minute thing. We're going to make some money off these plants. We got all these 1 gallon containers, sock them into 3 or 5 gallon pots and sell them for more money. So don't be afraid to dig or, pull them up out of the pot and take a look at them. So you don't want to select plants that are weak, have the elongated stems because they've been sitting in the wrong place, floppy, broken stems. Just make sure you inspect the plants, look underneath. A lot of the times in the garden centers, you'll see them that have bugs all over them. You don't want to buy those plants, and you might want to let the garden center person know that, hey, come here and look at these. They're covered with aphids. They don't need to be sold, or they should not be sold. And you want to pick plants that are about to bloom, or that is full of buds about to bloom. So you're going to get the best show at your house with them. Because if you buy that real pretty one that's in bloom at the store, like right now, when you're buying mums, yeah, you don't want to buy them in full bloom because they're almost done. And so if you buy them where they're barely starting to open, or they've got the little flower buds on them, you're going to get a longer lasting mum in your landscape. And other plants, same thing. So and plants, your perennials, they will need to be deadheaded or pinched throughout the year. And you can keep those flowering, coreopsis, your coneflowers, black-eyed Susan, zinnias. We're going into annuals too. I love zinnias because it seems like the more you cut them back and use them for arrangements, the more they grow. They're just going to put off more flowers. So I think zinnias ought to be in every garden, because that's one thing that you can plant. And if you got kids around, You can just give them a little pair of scissors and you can tell them to go out there and make a bouquet, and they're not gonna hurt anything. You know, they're gonna go out there and they're gonna get some flowers and
Nice.
they're gonna grow back. There are some, I may have to talk to, do you know on the zinnias, the varieties that are mildew the batteries? Veneries, something like that. Okay. Veneries. Yeah, Charlie has mentioned that.
Fine.
Yeah.
More resistant to mildew.
Mhm. And that's it. Okay. Okay. So there are some resistant varieties out. So you just have to be careful and then, watch the weather conditions. As I always tell people, if we have hurricanes in the south, they're bringing up downy mildew and powdery mildew. That's all going to blow upwards this way. And so if you need to spray, that's going to be your signal. Is if there's a hurricane going on down south that's blowing winds up our way, it's going to be bringing in fungal organisms and spores. And so you spray before they get there. It's a preventative type thing. Okay. So, of course, you want to select plants that have healthy foliage, good dark color, good dark green color. Look for any insect damage, broken branches, rust, colored spots. These can be signs of diseases. Look for insects. Look on the underside of the leaves because that's usually where they're hiding. So they'll be on the underside, or they might be in the leaf petioles. Check the pots. You see a lot of dead leaves and debris on top of those pots. They've probably been sitting at that nursery for a while and they've been stressed to the point where they've dropped leaves. And so there could be disease organisms in there. There could be, like aphids, spider mites, mealybugs, whiteflies, scale. Those are some of the most common insects that are going to be found at a garden center or in a greenhouse. And then, you can detect pests, especially with spider mites. If you have a white sheet of paper, if you just tap the plant over that white sheet of paper and then take your thumb and rub it across, and if you see red streaks, then you've got the red spider mite on the plant, and you don't want to take that plant home. Again, you might want to tell the nursery owner, hey, these plants got spider mites on them. Because if you see a mottled color in the leaves, something's been feeding on the leaves. And so if you just do that tap on a piece of white paper, and smush it out, see a red streak, you got red spider mites. And thrips. Yes. Yeah. Because you usually can't see them with the naked eye. You would need, to have a hand lens or something like that. Inspect the root system, make sure the roots are healthy, and that you can, press on the sides of the container, loosen those roots up, pop them out, make sure that they're not really root bound. If the plant is filling the pot with roots, that is okay because you can take it and you can score it or cut it. But if it's got large roots and it's mainly roots and not very much soil and they're going in a circle, then you don't want that plant, especially a tree or a shrub, because that's going to continue to grow like that and it girdles and the plant will be very short lived because it's going to kill itself. Yeah. So, like I said, root bound plants have an overabundance of roots that are circling in the pot. They're going to hinder establishment when transplanted. If the roots are brown, slimy, or black, kind of discolored, or have a smell to them, you definitely don't want to take that plant home with you because it means it has a root rot or has just been overwatered, sat in the water too long. You want healthy roots. Healthy roots are kind of whitish colored, and they can be kind of gray and thick, but if they're slimy, so. Planting on cloudy or overcast days can be best for yourself and the plants because you're keeping yourself out of the sun. But that can really mess up the transplant process. If you put them out in the heat of the day and they have not been acclimated, maybe they've been at the nursery center or they've been sitting in your front porch where they're pretty much in the shade. and then you go suck them out in the sun, they're going to go into shock. So make sure that you either acclimate your plants by moving them out into the sun, getting them adjusted, make sure they're watered before you plant them, um, and then water afterwards. Even if the weatherman says there's a chance of rain, don't believe them. They're the only people I know that can be wrong half the time and still keep their job. So water, water, water. And after you've prepared your soil, try to stay out of it as much as possible. Either that or, I go in barefoot a lot of the times, or I wear my soft boots. And then as I come out, I'll have a rake or something and I kind of fluff that soil back up, because every time you walk into the bed, you're just compacting it. And you're just ruining what all that work that you just did. So, but stay out of it, especially if it's soggy. Just hold off on planting because you don't want to plant when it's really wet. If you can. I know, if you're a landscaper, you've got a job to do. Sometimes you have to do it in whatever conditions exist and hope for the best. But if you're really conscientious about what you're doing, you're going to wait until that soil is in the right, that it's friable, it's not too wet, it's not too dry, to plant those beds. Plants should be planted at the same level they were growing in their containers. We talked about the root ball. You can always score those, cut those roots so you don't get the girdling roots. And then after all your plants are in the ground, you do want to thoroughly water them. Now, I remember Delona Shockey was one of our master gardeners from a long time ago, and I used to work with her at Plant the Campus Red, which is one of our big events. And she used to always crack up the students, and Colleen will still do this if she comes. You know what I'm saying? She'll pull out the plant out of the 6-pack, and she says, "You got to rub their little butts. You got to rub their little butt and wake them up before you put them into the ground." She was so funny. I probably shouldn't have told that joke. But yeah, you either got to loosen them up a little bit, is really what she was telling them. So, especially if they are kind of root bound, pull them apart a little bit. So one of the key aspects in being a good steward in the landscape is the intentional management of that soil quality. And we've talked about that a lot. We want the soil to have the ability to infiltrate the water, to move and hold water. That is vital to plant survival. And as we see our climate change and we have more of these drastic flash droughts, 2 or 3 weeks without water, 100 degrees or close to 100 degrees, those things impact your plants. They impact your trees. And so when we're looking at no rain for several weeks, you do need to water your plants. I mean, even if they're established or you think they're established, trees and shrubs, usually up to 3 years, I will continue to water those. Because again, they're expensive, they're an investment. And, just make sure that you're watering. I have a way to address that. Your site preparation, you're going to address that compaction or drainage issues and incorporate organic matter. You will have soil tested, so you're adding your amendments in at that point. And then after planting, maintain that soil cover with a mulch. You can use an organic mulch, just the wood chips, pine bark, or pine needles, whatever you like. And I think we did a little discussion on the coloring. That's just up to you. I mean, I remember, again, this is my first house I had in town here, and I got some of the red mulch because I thought it was so pretty. And I worked so hard to put it out, and then we had this big rain come along, and I sat out on my front porch and I watched all the red go down the rain. And then it was not so pretty red mulch. So I didn't do that anymore. So I learned my lesson. Just brown mulch will work. And that's when I started. That's also when I found the creeping Jenny and realized that it would mass. I really didn't need that much mulch. So I could use plants as mulch. So but over time, the mulches are going to break down. They're going to increase those soil organisms, the microorganisms, because they provide energy sources for them to feed on. And so you're going to have a healthier soil. You're making a healthier ecosystem. Let's see, we went over all this. I think I'm getting a little repetitive here. Weed barrier fabric. Weed barrier fabric is just overused, and it can cause a lot of problems, especially if it's in an annual bed where you're going to be changing plants out every year. You'll probably want to find a different method of weed control, because usually with your weed barrier fabric, you're wanting to keep the weeds out. So you put the weed barrier fabric down and you plant, and then you put a mulch on top of that. Well, weed seeds are brought in by wind, birds, animals. They're going to drop those seeds on top of that mulch and on top of the weed barrier fabric. So it really does not help to solve the weed problem. And if you've got Bermuda grass or crabgrass, that stuff's going to come right through it. And every time you have to cut a hole in that landscape fabric, you're opening it up, you're letting sunlight in. Those dormant seeds that are down there are going to open up and come to life. So, and if you use the landscape fabric in and around trees, they tend to keep the water from coming through and deeply watering that tree or shrub. And so if you go, you put the landscape barrier fabric down and then you mulch, and your trees are the water. When the water does come down, it's going to be repelled by the mulch. Okay. And then it's also repelled by that weed barrier fabric. So the plant is just not getting the water that it needs, or it gets stuck in that mulch. And then your roots start to try to grow up instead of down. And well, if you want a well-placed, sturdy tree, you want the roots to kind of grow downward and fill out that top 6 to 12 inches of soil. So there's several reasons why the weed barrier fabric for a permanent fix, we just don't recommend anymore. Now, on annual systems like with vegetables or plasticulture strawberries, a lot of farmers will still use that, but it is an annual system. That plastic and all those plants are pulled up once a year and disposed of, and then they put new plastic down in the fall. Most of the hopefully they've already gotten their strawberries in for this year, the plasticulture strawberries. So usually you start planting them or making your beds and stuff like that, put the mulch down, and then plant your strawberries by the end of September, so that they can get established and make it through our cool seasons. Okay. Yeah, but your weed barrier fabric is not going to be a cure-all. It can also reduce the ability of soil organisms to move, to create tunnels. I just like a thick layer of mulch, and then trying to weed and even spot spray when things get too out of control. But hand weeding is a good stress relief. It's good exercise. And I think I'm gonna keep. Are you guys ready for a break? Are you ready for a break? Okay, I'll stop here and we'll take about a 10-minute break and come back.
I'm gonna plug in, you saw all the students, so you already know this. If you haven't watched Volunteer Gardener on PBS, 7:30, and if you, it's also the Tennessee Road Show that comes on before.
And see Crossroad.
Different. But Volunteer Gardener, it's a 30-minute segment. For me, it's Channel 8, PBS, 7:30 on Thursday. And they cover formal garden, greenhouse type garden, growing things.
And Annette Schrader, one of the hosts, is former master gardener. Yes, we've had several of our gardeners.
Yes. Look these up
Mm-hmm.
and you can yourself.
Yep. Okay, well, let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and. Oh. And there's some pickle melons up there. If you haven't tried a pickle melon, pickle melon. They're good. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so like, it's your.
Okay.
What does she have?
Was she in good standing? Did she become?
I don't think she was certified.
Okay. Okay. So what the kind of the rule is if they were certified and in good standing in another state, she just needs to bring her certificate or a letter for extension like there. And then you'll bring, she still have to pay for it. So. if you want- But if you did not complete her initial one, to become certified, it's perfect. Right.
And if you can find it. Whether she has enough time to do it.
Okay.
Right now, she's working on a PhD.
Okay.
If you're not gonna do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interested in it.
Yeah, it just depends on where she was. And it's okay. Yes.
Okay, and just sprinkle them all in there.
What? I think I.
No, they're great. I just don't want to lose all that soil. I don't want to. Yeah,
Right.
because like a big seed flow.
Yeah, you don't know what.
No, I just. And I decided I'm not gonna.
Okay.
I mean, it is and it isn't. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. And, I just slowed down. Took it down a lot. You know,
Here wants tomatoes. I'm like,
one tomato plant. One tomato plant, one tomato. If
I
you like
want
those.
tomatoes. It's probably that big. Among all my compost, I'm like. It's eroding.
Probably a bird.
I'm like, oh, we'll just see what happens. It'll die, right?
Anyways, yes.
Oh, yeah, with the freeze.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, maybe I'll get a few tomatoes off of it and the dog.
Hmm.
Well, thank you.
Drink more for the.
Oh, yeah, they're not here. Oh, we'll have all that. Just bring in a dish. Yeah, we've got all that here. Yeah. Yeah, we've got the utensils. We'll have.
No.
I put it in that last email. But, yeah, Rosie Wilcox was the person to contact and let her know what it is. Yeah. But I put her email in that last email that I sent to you off, class reminder. So you can let her know what you're gonna bring. Does it work? Is it in a wet area? Could be a.
It's like on a slip out.
Yeah, next one, next.
No, that's because I'm not sure what it is. It's not that.
Yeah. Yeah. That.
I.
Just take that, take mine, I like far away. Things and stuff on the face. Oh, I can see it, there's any damage.
Yeah.
And then the. If I need to, I can go out. Yeah. Could be. Okay, are y'all ready to get started? Got a little bit more to go, and then I had some pretty plant pictures we were going to go through. Just kind of looking at your soil and water management. You know, your take home message is that your plants will not survive without water. Okay. So, usually we say the plants need about 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week. I say, what you're wanting to do is soak your plants down to where it's wetted at least about 6 inches. And that way you know that the root ball, the root system is getting wet. Because if you're continually just wetting like the top 1 or 2 inches of the soil, again, your roots are not going to grow downward. They're going to grow upward. They're going to be spoiled. They're going to be waiting for you to come back every couple of days and sprinkle water on them. So if you get to where you're watering deeply and thoroughly once a week, that should be good. Okay. And if you have a sprinkler system, you may just have to monitor it, check, take a trowel, dig down, after it's run 30 minutes, turn it off, let it settle, check and see how deeply the soil has been wetted. You may have to turn it back on in a little while. Okay. Or if you're hand watering, you go through it once, just don't do a sprinkled baptism. We want a full dunking. Okay. So, and the idea time to water is early in the morning, or early evening once the sun starts to go down. But you don't want to water like when it's dark out usually, because you're adding a kind of a double whammy, because we always have dew that builds up. You have the humidity and you have dew that builds up on the plants. And if you're getting them wet on top of that, that just gives those fungal organisms a better place to land and take hold. And then you increase your disease problems. So I do like to give my plants a good shower. I will just take the sprayer on the end of the hose, and if I have aphids or something like on my tomatoes, I will literally just give them a bath, kind of wipe them down and blow them bugs off. If you have evergreen plants like your arborvitae or the little Alberta spruces that are prone to getting different types of mites, just give them a good hard spray with water every now and then and just knock those bugs loose. It kind of loosens them up and knocks the dead leaves off. And so I just like to give them a good, real hard shower every now and then to clean them up. So especially,
Kill bugs.
well, it usually does. It will dislodge them from the plant, and then once they fall onto the soil, they'll usually die. So, I mean, you can go back and spray with an insecticide or use insecticidal soap, something like that, but you're reducing the populations that can continue to mate and reproduce, and you're knocking off some of those eggs and things too. So,
On the downside of them, you have part of the plant seeds, there's a fungal disease, that water.
mm-hmm. And you,
22 there.
right. Yeah, that's why you want to do something like that early enough into the day where the leaves can dry off. And that kind of also goes back to your spacing on your plants, pruning to make sure that they're thinned out so the air can move through and they can dry out easily. So fertilization, of course, we're going to take a soil sample before we apply any fertilizers or lime. It's very, very much worth the investment of $25, because when you get our soil samples back, you get the recommendations for that particular plant that you're wanting to grow. But your fertilizers are used for different reasons. They can boost growth and flowering. Something high in phosphorus would be to promote the flowering, fruiting and flowering. Nitrogen tends to promote leafy growth or foliage growth. So if you have too much nitrogen, you may have a lot of leaves on your plants and you're not getting any flowers. That may mean you're a little bit out of balance and you need to back off on your nitrogen and maybe, use some bone meal or something higher in phosphorus and potassium, lower in nitrogen. So there are bloom sorter formulations like a 5-12-12 or a 6-12-12. Just again, that first number: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. So you want lower nitrogen, higher phosphorus, higher potassium. We also have water soluble and slow release fertilizers, and those break down with water. Okay, so usually they're coated. Maybe I'm talking about the wrong thing. So the water soluble, slow release, and pellet form. Okay, it kind of goes down here. So they're pelleted. The fertilizer is covered with a pellet that breaks down with the addition of water, and that releases the fertilizer over time. So it depends on how long it's going to last. It will usually say on the label, reapply in 3 to 6 months. So that's the average time for it to break down. But the more you water, the faster it's going to break down. Okay. So, but those long-lasting fertilizers that you don't have to worry about getting out there and fertilizing every week. Some people just like to use, like America Grow type or Peters, the water soluble ones, and just to give their plants an extra boost, keep them green, keep them flowering. That's going to leach readily in the soil. But some of it is taken in as a foliar feed through the plant. So if you have a plant that is looking yellow and needs an instant fix, you might just spray that whole plant with a Miracle-Gro type mix, or you might need to spray it with iron or something like that to green them back up. So okay, so you don't always need fertilizer. So if your plants are vigorous, they seem to be growing well, especially your trees and shrubs, you don't want to over fertilize them. So if they seem to be vigorous and not having a problem, you probably don't need to fertilize. Okay. And, if you want to make sure, take a soil test and follow that. But if you're getting good growth each year, you probably don't need additional fertilizer. Pest management, choosing the species and cultivars that are well suited to this growing environment, our climate zone. And you also want to look into the ones that have genetic resistance against some of the common pests and diseases. And some of them have genetic resistant to drought or, drought tolerance. So proper moisture, fertility management is going to sustain good health. You always want to scout your garden, just walk through it every couple days. I like, if I can, when I go home in the evenings, I like to go out to my garden and I will pull weeds or I will water, but I will walk through the garden and see what's going on, see what needs to be picked, and see if I find any insects, things like that. So again, that's kind of a daily stress relief for me. If I can get home in time to see the garden, then, I'm going to be out there working in it. So then you can decide, if you do have a disease or an insect pest, you can decide what you're going to do about it. Do you need to remove the plant? Is it just a little cosmetic damage you can trim off, or do you need to spray if you have a major infestation of bugs or a disease? And that's where the extension office comes in handy. So if you're not sure what your problem is, you can always take pictures and send me pictures. You can bring in a sample. If I'm not here, we do have 2 other A&R agents here that are pretty good. They're learning about identifying diseases and insects, and that's really the only way they're going to learn, if some of those things are brought in and given to them also. So I'm kind of easing some of the work on the younger ones. 25 years has gone by really fast. Mulch is good, but you don't want to have too much mulch. I think we saw when we were talking about trees, you see the trees got the mulch pile 2 foot thick around it. You don't want to do that. Just a couple inches of mulch is going to be good. That's going to help prevent many seeds from rooting and setting down. Also, just keeping on those weeds while they're small and before they go to seed. Okay, so hand picking and that's that going through that garden every day, especially when you're watering. That's when I like to weed because you can spray them spray them real good, pick them up, have a bucket nearby, and just pull weeds as you're watering multitask. So you can pull by hand, use a hoe or another garden implement. There are herbicides that you can use that are safe for garden vegetables. Just make sure that you read the labels because there are some herbicides that are meant to be used in your lawn or around your trees, but they're not meant for edible products. They're not meant for your vegetables or your fruit trees and things like that. So make sure you're buying the proper formulation. And so a pre-emergent herbicide is going to be incorporated into the soil, and that's going to keep those weed seeds from completely germinating and coming up. It kills them right there. So, but if they've already come up out of the ground, then you're going to want a post-emergent herbicide, some like glyphosate or other brand that you can just spot spray to get rid of, or you can pull them by hand, whichever you want to do. So, but always, always, always read, follow those label directions. Make sure that you are wearing the proper equipment, or PPE equipment, basically long sleeve shirt, long pants, shoes that cover your feet, gloves. If you're sensitive to it, use a mask or put something over your face. And don't spray in the wind where it's blowing back. I mean, sometimes it just happens. You get a gust of wind and it's like, oh my god, got me. So but just read and follow those label directions and try to protect yourself from getting those chemicals on you. So some of these hard to kill weeds, okay, like nutsedge, you see up there in the corner. Nutsedge is very hard to control without without using a chemical that can suppress it. If you hand pull, you've got to make sure that you get the whole root system, and it has little bulblets on the side or nuts. That's why it's called nutsedge. And if you leave one of those little nuts in the ground, it's going to grow into a new plant. And so you can hand remove as much as possible, but the key really is to keep them from going to seed, keep them from forming that fuzzy little seed head that sits on top. So, but once they get in, they can be very, very invasive. They can be very hard to control without having to go to a chemical. Herbicides that you can use in the landscape. Now, this would not be for vegetable gardens. It would be in landscape plants that are non-edible, would be either Basagran or Manage. And then, of course, here's our favorite. We've got our Bermuda grass and Poast, Poast is a really good one for controlling the Bermuda grass or suppressing it. You can't really kill Bermuda grass. You can what am I trying to say? Trim around the edges of your landscape beds, kind of make a barrier, maybe build a trench around, and that will make it easier for you to weed eat and keep it out of your gardens. But you're suppressing it, even with these weeds, herbicides here. So grass getter, Poast, this fluozapop is label name would be Grass Begone or Ornament over the top. That can be used literally over the top of most ornamentals and woody plants and shrubs. It would not be something you would use on ornamental grasses because it does kill grasses. Yes, ma'am.
Good grass, if you use glyphosate, won't it go down and kill the roots?
It will, but I mean then you're going to have a streak going all across your lawn because you never know how long. Yeah.
Just start.
Mhm. Yeah, you have patches. Right. Yeah.
Then if you just spray with glyphosate, how you have to do it?
Yeah, you'd have to do it in a couple of times. It seems like it would. but that's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed, because I've had patches come up that I've tried to pull and then spray and they. Mhm.
That, because
Yeah,
the top feed the root.
eventually by depriving it from sunlight, that's going to kill the roots on the plant. But Bermuda grass is so aggressive.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it grows deep. I mean, it grows deep into the soil. I mean, it'll come up in between the sidewalk cracks. Or if you got, cracks in your asphalt in your driveway, you'll see Bermuda grass coming up in there. So it's a very, very tough weed to control. So.
These are different chemistry.
Mhm.
Did you say you can use both of those in your ornamental bed or just live?
They can all be used in ornamental beds. The only one that you can spray over the top of ornamental plants would be the fluazafop. Ornament over the top. And you can use that over the top of most ornamentals. You got to read the label. But if you put it on ornamental grasses, it will kill the ornamental grass. So if you had Bermuda grass in your ornamental grass bed, you're basically down to hand weeding, because you could do some spot spraying that might work. But again, it's just so aggressive that it's hard. And once it gets in there and gets overrun with it, it's just a matter of hand weeding, mulching, maybe doing some spot spraying. But
Ergonomics, they are called open top.
yeah,
They say will get out. Like I tried to get, I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
But anyway, they say, you know, the top.
right. Yes, that's what the ornament over the top. It'd probably be the exact fluazafop. That is the scientific name or the active ingredient in it. So there's going to be other brand names out there, but then it's got a list of plants that are, you can spray over the top. So you want to make sure you follow that label again. Okay, starting seeds indoors. Gosh, this is seeds can be easily sown in these ribbed trays, and it's kind of hard to see here, but there are small little blocks all along in here. Okay, and I like to start out with these type of seeds. They may be like 72s or 100s in there, and so like if I have a small garden and I wanted to put, okay, I may start out, that would be a row of tomatoes, and then I would put a label on it. And then I'd go over to the next row, and that might be my little pepper plants, and so on and so forth. And I put a label on each end. And then when they get up to a certain height, then I transplant them into these. Oh, there it is. Okay. I transplant them over into the larger containers. And depending on how early you start your seeds will depend on how many times you have to transplant them. But you want to plant them as deep as possible when you transplant from one container to the other, so that you get a short, stocky stem. And then, of course, you can use the what do you call heat heat mats. Sorry, the heat mats on a lot of your warm season plants like tomatoes and peppers. They really like it warm. Cool season plants, not so much, because they like the cooler weather. So I've germinated plants by putting them on top of the refrigerator where they get a little bit extra warmth, on top of the dryer, things like that. If I'm just doing a few, you can make, use what you've got at home to do this. But if you have access to a little grow lab or some fluorescent lights, that will help once they start to come up. You want to keep that light as close to the top of the plant as possible, because have you noticed if you start your plants and you put them in the window, what happens? Yeah. Okay. So that is a growth hormone that's literally making that plant bend and go toward the sunlight. And so you have to turn it all the time. So if you have a lighting system that you can just raise up and down and keep that light as close as possible, and then you may have to pinch the tops a little bit and take out that apical meristem. Remember we talked about that? It causes more lateral growth and makes a squat more sturdy plant. The stem will be more sturdy also. So different ways to manipulate your plants. Be leery of these peat pots because you are missing the transplant process. If you start your seeds in these and they get about 2 inches tall, you need to either carefully take a pencil or some type of tool and ease them back down into the soil. And because if you just let them grow, they're going to be leggy and they're going to fall over and they're going to break. And then another thing about the peat pots is you need to break them up, kind of like the ball of burlap on a tree. But these peat pots, you need to break them up in the soil and don't let that part of that be sticking out because it actually wicks the water away from the plant itself. So you want to make sure that you pull that apart, kind of break it up in the soil and water really well. But you don't want that peat pot sticking up out of the soil, just like that right there. So just be careful using those, but there's a lot of different types. You can get the 6-packs, you can get the little 4-inch containers. We have 8-packs and things like that. So a lot of different ways. You can buy kits at the stores, that but you do want a cover to put over the top of that. I don't think we said that, did we? Yeah, maybe go over here. But it helps to make like a little mini greenhouse. So again, on your starting your seeds indoors, your water, of course, is important for germination. If that seed does not take in the water, it will not germinate. It'll lay there and rot. So some difficult to start seeds, like if you're wanting to start some oak trees or sometimes even your squash seed and stuff like that, you may have to score them or just take a piece of sandpaper and just kind of rub them and break that opening up a little bit. And that way that water can get in and that seed can germinate and start to grow. But your water stress is going to direct can be a severe impact on the growth and establishment of the plant. So drought stress is common, but overwatering is common also. If you look at that picture in the middle and the one to the right side there, that's probably an area where that plant has been overwatered. And when I have plants at this stage in their life cycle, I like to have a pot in a pot. Okay, you'll have it in the little containers like the 6-packs or whatever, or a ribbed container, and then you'll have another container that you set it down in, and that's where you put your water in, and it sucks the water in up the bottom. Okay, so you don't want to be watering these baby plants over the top because you can, lose track of what you're doing and, and then all of a sudden you've washed out a bunch of plants. If the water is settling right in there, then you get rhizoctonia, you get damping off and different diseases. You'll have to watch for mold and things like that. So, what I do is I will leave them, that pot in a pot when I water, leave it in there for a good 30 minutes and then pull them out of the water, let them drain, maybe use that water on another set of plants, and then put the plants back in the container with no water in it. So you're not just letting it sit overnight or continually in water. And you do want to wait until they are dry, but not to the wilting point where it is.
What do you think of using like a capillary gas from like a reservoir, sticking it on the bottom?
You can. Yes, that is another way. A capillary mat is kind of draws, you set your plants on top of that and you water it. Same concept, really. Yeah. So to get these seeds to germinate, usually about 60 degrees for cool season plants would be warm enough. 80 degrees, but if you need just an average, set your heat mat at about 75 degrees or an area where, it's getting to be about 75 degrees. These heat mats are fairly cheap. You can look them up on Amazon, and these are made to be used around water. They're sealed so that you're not going to electrocute yourself. Now, I've had a certain farmer uses a heated heated blanket. It's like, no, you should not be using an electric blanket. No, no. He does. Okay, and then again with the lighting, as the plant grows, you think Roy G. Biv. Red and blue have the most impact on plant growth. And this is especially important if you're manipulating poinsettias or amaryllis, like maybe on a commercial level, or you're forcing them to bloom. You really need to study up on these type of things. So, but the red and the blue have the most impact on plant growth. Green is the least effective because it's really just a reflection of the chlorophyll in the plant. Blue promotes vegetative growth, and red, when combined with blue, encourages the flowering. So in your larger greenhouses and such like that, you will manipulate your reds and your blues to make those plants flower. So do you do any of that in your greenhouse or just nah? Okay. Yeah, poinsettias and the amaryllis, the Thanksgiving cactus or Christmas cactus, those are all that you can kind of manipulate and get to flower whenever you do. Fluorescent lights are the most common. We do not recommend the incandescent lights. You don't really find those much anymore. Everybody's gone to LED or fluorescent lights. But incandescent lights are just too high in red and red orange, and it just produces a lot of heat. It doesn't really give the plant that red and that blue wave that it needs to grow. So again, once germination occurs, your light levels must be high enough to prevent stretching, and they consider that about 1,000-foot candles. Again, as we've shown here, you want to just keep the light as close to the plants as possible, and you can make your own. Just buy a fluorescent light, and maybe build a little cage to hold it up, and put your light on a chain to where you can easily lift it up and down. I did one of these one time I set it on an ironing board, and I hung the light from a beam in the ceiling. I did this down in the basement, and it was just on a chain, and so I could lift it up and down, and I just had a room, but figured out a reason for the ironing board. Had no other reason for an ironing board.
You have to be careful that, just using fluorescent light.
Yes.
If you are trying to trigger a plant to go from
Yeah.
vegetative to reproductive stage,
Mhm.
there's specific
Yeah.
light effects.
Yes. Yes, that is true. So your grow lights are really a better choice over just fluorescent lights. But if you're just fooling around with a few plants to put in your garden, you're probably fine. But yeah, there's a whole science to this. Humidity, it's not necessary for germination, but it helps to reduce the rate of evaporation. So that's why you want to use plastic coverings, create that greenhouse effect until the plants germinate and get an inch or two tall. You may have to actually pull these up because you'll have water condensation. And so you don't want your plants to stay too wet or they're going to get diseases and die. So you may have to pull that covering off of them every now and then, let some air movement in, and then put it back down. And this is, a time when you don't want to be overwatering. If you have a lot of wilting, you start seeing diseases forming, then you probably need to back off on your watering, increase your light, increase your air circulation to help prevent those diseases from forming. And on saving seeds, most seeds will hold the germination for several years. I mean, we get old seeds given to us all the time. I mean, we know that the germination rate is going to go down a little bit each year, but they will last for several years if they're taken care of properly. Corn does not store well, so you usually don't want to buy more corn than what you can plant in 1 year, because that germ does go down. I mean, it's not going to germinate as well the next year and the second and third year. So, but if you have extra seeds, you can take those and put them inside a canning jar or a Ziploc bag. Other sealed container, I, save those little desiccants that come out of, like vitamins, or if you buy a leather purse, it's got a little desiccant pack in there. You can put those in with your seeds, and that helps to absorb the moisture. And I like to put mine in the freezer where it kind of puts them back into dormancy, because I have stored them in the refrigerator, like, down in the vegetable drawer or whatever, and then go in there and the seeds have germinated, so it's still, because you have that opening and closing of the door. And, if it's a cool season plant, even though it's, kind of cool in there, you might still get some germination. Okay, bulbs and bulb-like
Carla,
plants. Yes.
what do you think about soil blocking? Like I've seen
Oh,
some
yes, I didn't
videos
mention the
about that.
soil blocks. You
Yeah.
can, yes, you can create your own soil blocks, using a potting mix, or you can make your own. It's a little, it's a little metal thing that actually you put your soil in a container and you smush it down, and then you put these blocks on, and then you poke a hole in it, and then you plant your plant in it. And then you just, when it's ready, you lift it out and put it into its other container. But yes, soil blocks, a lot of greenhouse growers do that. So bulb-like plants are perennials. They have a period of growth that's followed by one of dormancy. And that dormancy is just an adaptation to demanding life cycles of the plant. These plants can endure unfavorable conditions, such as limited water or sun. That's why you see your daffodils, will just be kind of growing everywhere. So they can take a lot of different soil conditions, and they're using the food that is stored in the bulb or other structure to grow and flower when conditions are favorable. Wow, it's 8:45. Okay, we may not get to look at the pretty pictures. Okay, so the types of storage organs, we have a bulb, which is a large modified bud, and it has a vertical stem and leaves, and it's kind of in a spherical shape. So tulips, daffodils, lilies, narcissus, and amaryllis are all bulbs. A corm is going to be, example would be a gladiolus, a crocus, autumn crocus, and it's just a solid vertical swollen stem. And new corms are going to develop off those lateral buds or lateral roots. Rhizome is a modified horizontal stem, and it is in the soil or right on the soil surface. So calla lilies, cannas, bearded iris, water lilies will have rhizomes. And then we have tubers, tuberous roots such as dahlia, caladium, and they are going to lie just below the soil surface. They don't like to be deeply covered. So if you have dahlias or caladium and you plant them too deeply, they're either going to rot and die, or they're just going to be sickly. They're not going to flower as well, things like that. So they'll try not to plant them too deeply at all. So. And again, bulbs prefer a well-drained soil in full sun. Unless they are woodland plants, then they may like more of a shaded area. So just do some research on what you're wanting to plant and find out what it needs to grow. Always improve the texture of a heavy soil by the addition of organic matter. You can supplement poor soils with a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio fertilizer. I like to put bone meal just right in the holes when I plant bulbs. I'll just sprinkle a little bone meal. I don't really have a recipe or an amount for that, because sometimes I'm just guessing. If you get a soil test, they'll tell you exactly what you need. But sprinkle a little bit of bone meal in there helps them get established. You do not want to put nitrogen in the hole with the bulb or a tuber or a plant. So to dig and dry, I'm going to kind of skip forward here. So if you do have to dig bulbs and store them, so some of our tender ones like your dahlias and your cannas, well, not cannas will live through anything. So I would say more like the elephant ear or things like that. Yeah. So I would use a fork, a digging fork, and gently dig down where you know those bulbs are located, and just gently, put that in the ground and pop them up out of the ground. And then yeah, and then you'll divide them out. If you have any that you have damaged, you spear with the fork, whatever, just go ahead and throw them out or replant them down in the ground. You don't want to store them if they have an injury, because it's like, one rotten apple ruins the whole bushel. It's kind of the same concept. So you want to try to do this without damaging them. Cleaning. If you're doing this and it's really muddy, you might want to rinse them off. If it's just got a little bit of dirt on them, you can shake that off. You'll want to probably lay out some type of screen or build some kind of a table where you can lay these things out and let them cure. And so curing is kind of like when when you harvest your onions out of the garden. Okay, you leave them out to lay until they kind of turn brown on the outside. Same thing here. When they get that brown coating on the surface and they're hardened off, they're cured, then you can store them. And so, but it depends on your temperatures. How quickly this happens depends on your temperatures and the air movement. So about 60, 70 degrees in a well-ventilated area, couple weeks, and they should be ready to store. Okay.
Draw labels and
Okay, usually it's sawdust, or I'll use newspaper. Peat moss works well. You just don't want to use soil itself. Yeah, vermiculite would be okay. Peat moss, something like that. And if you think you're going to have disease problems, you can dust them with an insecticide or a fungicide before you store them. But usually, if they're cured properly, you don't really need this. But if it's something that you've paid a lot of money for and you really want to protect them and make sure they make it through the winter and you can plant them again next spring, you may just want to dust them with an insecticide, fungicide mixture, so that they don't develop disease and insect infestations. Label your plants. Like I said, if you're going to be, pulling up your irises or something like that, and you're not going to be able to replant them until spring, in the spring before you dig them, you may want to put out labels so that you remember what color. Okay, so if you have purple irises, the pink ones, red, whatever, label them so that when you go back and dig them, you can label them on the boxes where you store them. Okay. You can use paper bags. Like I said, you can use sawdust. I like using crates because they have a little bit of room for air movement. They've got holes between, so I do a layer of newspaper or cardboard, and put some peat moss or something like that, peat moss or sawdust down. Then maybe do another layer of newspaper, cardboard, same thing. Just keep layering it, but you want them to be loose enough to where they're not just getting damp and staying wet. Okay, so you want them to stay dried out. And like I said, don't forget the label. You can use paper bags and just write on the outside of the bag what they are, some way to have a label. Spring flowering bulbs, tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, crocuses, bulbous irises. These are ones that are planted the fall before, you plant them in fall because they flower in the spring. And so you're going to work up your soil. And here it just shows you're going to dig down, and this next chart actually shows you an idea of the depth. Okay, and it's based on the size of the plant or the bulb. So if you have a larger daffodil, you could be putting it as far as 8 inches into the ground. Okay, it just depends on the size of the bulb itself. So this chart, I believe you all have in your book. Your dahlias don't need to be too far down. That almost looks too far down for a dahlia to me. Ranunculus is going to be closer to the surface. The tuberous begonias, your iris, like to be right on the surface. Okay, so you can see cannas can go 5-6 inches deep. And calla lilies, same thing. Tulips, usually about 6 to 7 inches. So based on the size of the bulb itself, it's how deep you plant. And then, like I said earlier, with your succession, like your perennials, you want to have early spring bloomers, mid, late. So you want to do the same thing with with your bulbs. So make sure you're looking at them, study the labels, and because that way you'll have some blooming very early in the spring, late spring, mid spring, and then you go on into your other summer type plants and your summer flowering bulbs. So summer flowering bulbs are going to be planted in the spring after the fear of frost is over. Gladiola, lilies, dahlias, tuberous begonias, the calla lilies tend to like to be planted in the spring. Once they're established, they're established. Only these, like the dahlias and tuberous begonias and maybe the calla lilies would have to be dug up every year. It just depends on how hard of a winter we have. And you can always kind of over mulch these areas if you don't want to dig them up. And just make sure that they're mulched good so that they won't freeze and die. So again, same thing, spring planted bulbs for summer and late summer, autumn flowering. Make sure you have that succession going there. Some common problems and stresses that you're going to see with any types of plants, whether they're ornamental or in your garden. Stress, number one problem. It can be drought, too much water, too little water is usually what causes our problems, as well as the fluctuations in our temperatures. It's either too hot or too cold. There's no happy medium. Snails and slugs. You can use diatomaceous earth. You can use cracked up eggshells or ground up eggshells and put those around your plants. And what happens with that and the diatomaceous earth is when the snails and the slugs crawl through it, it splits their skin and then they dehydrate, and that's how it kills them. But other soft-bodied insects can be repelled with the diatomaceous earth too. So just keep an eye on things, make sure you're properly identifying the problem. But like we said, common stresses: too much, too little light, too much, too little water, overcrowding, poor nutrition, just poor soil. Stress on plants can be decreased by properly preparing the soil, purchasing healthy plants, spacing plants correctly, providing adequate water and sufficient water, apparently. So when it comes down to selecting the appropriate plants and providing them with what they need to grow and flourish in the landscape, your goal should be to reduce or prevent pollution. That's going to be by reducing your inputs. You want to reduce your fertilizer. You want to reduce your pesticides that you're using, things of that nature. If you don't need it, don't spray it. You want to conserve your natural resources. So in your landscape, if you have a tree or a plant that is desirable and you want to keep it, take care of it and protect it, especially if you're building a new home. You may want to do a tree preservation plan if there's a big tree there that you want to protect, or, if there's small trees, maybe you can dig and move while the construction is going on and then move them back, things like that. Maximize the ecological function. Our plants can be used to slow down rainwater and prevent erosion. Trees can be planted in specific areas to shade your house and shade your air conditioning so that your air conditioner unit does not work as hard, and that provides natural cooling for your house. And of course, you want it to look attractive. And then garden maintenance, there's no way to get around it unless you just want to plant flamingos and plastic flowers. But even then, the weeds are going to grow in between them. So just staying on it. Don't let it get out of control. Yeah. Do what I say, not as I do. But most plants will benefit from either cutting back throughout the growing season. Pinching, deadheading is the way to encourage them to continue flowering. Divide them as they needed, as well as keeping on with your weeding and your edging. So pretty much everybody knows what I mean by all these terms, correct? Yeah, this is getting repetitive, so we talked about that. edging is the word I was trying to think of a while ago. If you can edge a garden, I used to have a mantis tiller that had all kinds of little attachments that went with it. I loved the edger on that mantis tiller because then I could go around my beds 2 or 3 times a year. Sometimes I just do it because I like doing it. But that does make a little trench. And then if you're using a herbicide or if you're using mulch, you can keep those weeds back away and out of the landscape bed. Don't forget about hardscapes, using your bricks, your flagstones, make paths through the garden. I wouldn't put the path first. I would wait and see where people naturally walk across your lawn or walk through your garden, because that's where your paths are going to be. Because if you put a path, what are people going to do? They're going to walk around it. How many times you go to school campuses and, if you go to a college campus or something, and you'll see the sidewalk is here, there's a trail over here. It's a shortcut. So sometimes you've got to let the path develop itself out of the garden.
So will you go back for a couple slides that showed the picture? Come on. Yeah, there. Is that like that? What is that? That's just like a bear.
I think they've just sprayed it with like a Roundup type product. That's at one of our experiment stations that looks like Jackson. And yeah, they've mounded the ground. They've built the mounds to build the beds, and then they've mulched, and then they've used Roundup to edge. So rather than physically edging. Container gardening, if you don't have a place to garden in the ground, don't forget that there's a lot of ways that you can grow flowers and vegetables in containers. Okay. Depending on the size of the container, and they've got ones that hook to your, like, not the banisters, you like on your patios, that you can. The railing, yes. That you can set on the railing and have boxes right there. And so if you have a disability and you need to be able to reach things right in front of you, that might be a good way to continue to garden, because you can reach it easily. Different sizes of pots. You don't want to get them too heavy, if you have back problems, things like that. Or, have those on those little rollers where you can easily move them around, or get somebody with muscles to help with that. We're getting at 9 o'clock. I'm gonna just kind of skip over that. But basically, container gardening, you want to have a good container that's got a hole in the bottom. You need to water them more often. Your potting soil mixes that you can get, a lot of them will have fertilizer in it, so you have to be careful about what you buy. Sometimes they will have herbicides in it. So make sure, again, you read the label on what type of potting mix that you're using. And you could make your own using peat moss and a little bit of vermiculite and perlite, but it's easier to, unless you're really doing this in bulk and commercial, you can just, buy a bale of BMX and that'll last you a while. So, okay. Little bit of time for questions. We're right at 9 o'clock.
A long time ago, somebody had recommended to me putting like stones, or they actually use pieces of like broken plant pots, at the bottom of them to help for drainage. Is that recommended? Is it not? Is it?
I've heard both ways on it, that it works good, and other people say, well, the soil just settles down in between the rocks. Your most important thing is to make sure that the pot, or whatever you're using for a pot, has holes in the bottom for drainage. But if it makes you feel better to put a layer of rock down there, you just go ahead and do it. So that's yeah. But and it's got to have good sized holes in it.
Yeah, question about mold.
Moles. Okay.
Anti-mold.
The castor bean plant is a plant that repels moles because it has a certain chemical that it releases through the roots. The ricin, but it is poisonous to animals and children and such like that. So you've got to be very careful, It's a beautiful plant. I love the leaves on it. Yeah, yeah. Right now, I've seen some that are kind of changing colors, and they look really pretty.
Buy it.
You can buy them. You can buy seeds, or if you see somebody that's got them, just ask to gather their seeds. What I had to do when I was growing them is cut them off right after they flower, so that you don't get the seed formation, or they're very invasive. Okay. You can just plant that around your garden and it's supposed to repel the moles. And that's what they make the castor oil spray out of. Okay. But it is a poisonous product. And so, you just have to be careful, if you have children, animals, things like that around. You don't want them chewing on the leaves or anything, but most of the time it's not going to be very tasty. Somebody might want to take a bite out of it, and they're not going to want to eat it. Yeah, they're not going to eat it. They're going to chew on it and taste it. But, yeah. Okay. All right, guys, we are done for
Okay.
tonight. We'll see you next week. Okay. Yes.
Wait, don't go.